To the outside world, Cassian Morello was not a man, but an atmosphere. He was the sudden chill in a room, the reason conversations died in expensive restaurants, and the unseen hand that moved the city's currency like chess pieces. His reputation was built on a foundation of perfect order. In the Morello Empire, there were no accidents, no outbursts, and certainly no loose ends. He resided in a penthouse of glass and obsidian that hovered over the city, a sanctuary where every light was dimmed to his preference and every shadow served his silhouette. Serafina Moretti was the crown jewel of this curated perfection. To the public, their upcoming union was the romance of the century, the merging of two dynasties that would turn the city's concrete into a private playground. Cassian treated her with a devotion that was as precise as it was cold. He bought her emeralds that matched the hidden fire in her eyes and stood by her side at operas and galas like a monolith of protection. She was the only person allowed within his physical orbit, the only one who didn't tremble when he grew quiet. Their life was a masterpiece of high society theater. Every morning, they shared espresso on the terrace, the rising sun catching the light on Serafina's engagement ring, a diamond so large it felt like a shackle. She would lean into him, whispering about guest lists and floral arrangements, her voice like silk over gravel. To any observer, Cassian was a man finally softened by love, a king who had found his queen. He played the role of the smitten fiancé with a terrifyingly accurate mask, providing her with a life of such absolute security that she had grown bored within its walls. But this morning, the air in the penthouse felt different. The silence wasn't the usual peaceful quiet of luxury. It was the pressurized stillness of a deep-sea trench. Cassian sat at the head of the mahogany table, his movements fluid and rhythmic as he sliced through a blood orange. Across from him, Serafina scrolled through her phone, her thumb hovering over a message she thought he couldn't see. She looked radiant, her skin still flushed from what she claimed was a late night with the girls. Cassian watched the way her pulse jumped in her throat when he set his knife down with a soft clink against the china. He didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her the way a scientist looks at a specimen under a microscope. He noted the slight smudge of mascara she had missed in her haste, and the way she avoided his gaze by focusing on the silver cream pitcher. He knew every lie she was about to tell before she even opened her mouth. This was the perfect life they had built. A palace of glass where only one of them knew that the floor had already shattered. The rain didn't just fall in the north end, it reclaimed the streets, turning the cobblestones into mirrors and the narrow alleys into veins of liquid ink. Cassian's Maybach glided through the deluge like a predator through deep water. He had finished his business with the port authorities earlier than expected, a bribe accepted, a contract signed, and for a rare moment, the king was ahead of his own schedule. He wasn't supposed to be on this street, at this hour, in this weather. "Stop," Cassian said. The word was barely a breath, but the driver reacted as if a wall had suddenly materialized in the road. Through the tinted glass, the world was a blur of gray and neon, but Cassian's eyes were tuned to the anomalies. In a recessed doorway 30 feet away, two figures were pressed together, seeking shelter from more than just the rain. The man was Adrian Vale. Cassian recognized the reckless tilt of his head, the way he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who had never lost anything he truly valued. Then, the woman turned. The street lamp caught the sharp, aristocratic curve of Serafina's jaw. She wasn't pulling away. She was leaning in, her hands buried in the collar of Adrian's jacket, her body angled with a desperation Cassian had never seen in their own bedroom. In the silence of the car, Cassian could almost hear the rhythm of a passion that didn't belong to him. He watched Adrian whisper something into her ear, a joke, a promise, a lie, and saw Serafina throw her head back in a silent, jagged laugh. A hot, primitive surge of adrenaline spiked in Cassian's chest, a roar of white noise that threatened to drown out his reason. His hand moved toward the door handle, his fingers curling into a fist that could have crushed bone. The driver's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, dark and questioning, his hand hovering over the compartment where the suppressed Beretta lived. It would take 10 seconds. 5 for the man, 5 for the woman. The city would understand. The Morello honor demanded blood. But as Cashin watched Serafina reach up to trace the line of Adrian's lip, the heat in his blood turned to ice. He realized that if he stepped out of the car now, he was reacting to their story. He would be the jilted lover, the jealous husband, a man whose emotions were dictated by the whims of a girl and a thief. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs with a cold, metallic clarity. He watched them for another minute, documenting the betrayal with the precision of a crime scene photographer. He didn't see a fiancé anymore, he saw a strategic liability. He didn't see a rival, he saw a tool to be used. "Drive," Cashin commanded, his voice as smooth as polished stone. "Sir," the driver whispered, confused by the lack of carnage. "Drive," Cashin repeated, settling back into the leather seat. He reached out and adjusted his rearview mirror, moving it just enough so he could no longer see the alley. The struggle was over. The rage was gone, replaced by something far more lethal, a plan. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating the steam rising from a silver pot of Kenyan roast. Serafina sat bathed in the light, looking every bit the innocent bride-to-be in a silk robe the color of cream. She was humming, a soft, melodic tune that felt like a serrated blade against Cashin's nerves. It was the sound of a woman who believed she had successfully lived 2 lives in a single night. Cashin sat across from her, his posture relaxed, his expression a masterpiece of neutral calm. He watched her hands. They were steady as she poured his coffee, the giant diamond on her finger catching the light and throwing tiny, dancing rainbows across the table. "You were late coming in last night," Cashin remarked, his tone conversational, as if he were asking about the weather. "The charity gala must have been a success." Serafina didn't miss a beat. She looked up, offering him a smile that was practiced and radiant. "Oh, it was exhausting, Cass. You know how the Moretti cousins are when the champagne starts flowing. We ended up at a private lounge until 3. I didn't want to wake you." Cashin felt a strange, cold thrill at the sheer perfection of her lie. He looked at the curve of her throat, the same throat he had seen arched back in an alleyway just hours ago, and felt the urge to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but the grim amusement of a gambler who holds all the cards while his opponent bluffs with nothing. "A lounge," Cashin repeated softly. He picked up a strawberry, turning it over in his fingers. "The rain was quite heavy last night. I hope you didn't have to walk far to your car." For a split second, the humming stopped. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her eyes, a shadow moving beneath deep water. "The valet brought it right to the door," she said, her voice dropping a fraction in pitch. "Why do you ask?" Cashin did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled. It wasn't the tight, formal ghost of a smile he gave to business associates. It was wide, showing teeth, an expression of genuine, predatory delight. The sight of it made Serafina freeze, her fork hovering mid-air. To her, it looked like a rare moment of affection. To anyone who truly knew Cashin Morello, it was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "No reason," Cashin said, his smile widening as he reached across the table to cover her hand with his. His skin was ice cold. "I'm just happy, Serafina. I'm thinking about our future. I've decided to invite some of the younger associates to help with the gala preparations. Including that young man you mentioned once, Adrian Vale. He seems energetic. I think he'd be a perfect fit for my inner circle." Serafina's face drained of color, her skin turning the same shade as her silk robe. She tried to pull her hand away, but Cashin's grip was firm, a velvet vice. He watched the terror bloom in her pupils, the realization that her secret world and her public one were about to collide at his dinner table. "You're so thoughtful, Cashin," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am," he agreed, his smile never wavering. "I want everything out in the open. No more secrets between us." After all, what's mine is yours, and what's yours, I intend to keep very close. The Morello headquarters was a cathedral of steel and glass, a place where the air always felt thin and expensive. Adrian Vale walked into the executive boardroom with the swagger of a man who believed he had already won. He wore a sharp, slim-cut suit and a smirk that suggested he was savoring a private joke, the joke being that he was sleeping with the fiancée of the man at the head of the table. Cashin watched him enter, noting the way Adrian's eyes scanned the room for weaknesses. The younger man was a peacock, all flash and no depth, fueled by the dangerous delusion that he had outmaneuvered a king. Adrian, Cashin said, his voice a low, resonant hum. He didn't stand. He simply gestured to the leather chair directly across from him. I've heard interesting things about your work in the shipping district. Bold moves. Impulsive, but effective. Adrian settled into the chair, leaning back with a casual disrespect that made the guards by the door stiffen. I like to keep things moving, Mr. Morello. Stagnation is a death sentence in this city. Precisely why I called you here, Cashin replied. He slid a thick, matte black folder across the polished mahogany. I'm initiating a high-security transport project. Precious cargo, international movement. It requires someone with reckless ambition. Someone who isn't afraid to step into forbidden territory. Adrian flipped through the documents, his eyes lighting up as he saw the projected profit margins. He didn't see the fine print, he only saw the ladder he was about to climb. This is a significant responsibility. Why me? Cashin leaned forward, the light catching the predatory stillness in his eyes. Because I value transparency. I want to see exactly how you operate. I want you in this building every day. You'll report directly to me, and you'll work closely with Serafina on the logistics of the engagement gala. Since you're both so dedicated to the Moretti interests, it seemed efficient. The smirk on Adrian's face faltered, just for a heartbeat. The mention of Serafina in this clinical, professional setting was like a cold splash of water. He searched Cashin's face for a hint of suspicion, but he found only a mask of terrifyingly polite professional interest. It would be an honor, Adrian said, recovering his bravado. I'll make sure everything is handled with the utmost discretion. I'm sure you will, Cashin said. He stood up, the movement slow and graceful. He walked around the table and placed a heavy hand on Adrian's shoulder. The weight of it was unmistakable, a reminder of the power that could crush him in an instant. Just remember, Adrian. In this house, I see every move. I hear every whisper. I'm giving you a front-row seat to how I handle my most valuable assets. As Adrian left the room, his walk a little less confident than when he entered, Cashin turned to the window. He could see his own reflection in the glass, a shadow king silhouetted against the city. He wasn't just keeping his enemy close, he was building a cage out of opportunity. The atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted from a sanctuary to a gilded pressure cooker. For Serafina, the luxury that once felt like a reward now felt like evidence. Every morning, she woke to fresh lilies, her favorite, placed on her vanity, their scent so cloying it made her nauseous. Every afternoon, a courier arrived with another token of affection from Cashin, a vintage lace veil, a pair of diamond-encrusted heels, a set of handwritten vows he asked her to review. His kindness was relentless. It was an avalanche of devotion that left her breathless and terrified. You look pale, Kara, Cashin remarked one evening as they sat in the music room. He was nursing a glass of neat bourbon, watching her intently as she tried to focus on a guest list. Perhaps the wedding planning is taking too much of a toll. I've told Adrian to take over the vendor meetings. It should give you 2 more time to coordinate. Serafina's pen slipped, leaving a jagged ink trail across the expensive heavy stock. Adrian is a consultant, Cashin. He doesn't need to be involved in the floral arrangements. Nonsense, Cashin said, his voice as smooth as velvet. He stood and walked behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. He began to massage the tension there, his touch firm and possessive. He's family now. Or he will be. I want him to know exactly what it takes to protect something as beautiful as you. Serafina felt a cold shiver race down her spine. Cashin's fingers were moving in a slow, rhythmic pattern, but they felt like iron bands. She looked at their reflection in the darkened window. He stood over her like a shadow, his eyes dark and unreadable, while she looked like a trapped bird in a cage of silk and stone. The trap was invisible, yet she felt the walls closing in. Every time she tried to meet Adrian in secret, she found a Morello guard, helpfully, waiting to escort her. Every time she checked her phone, she wondered if the silence on the other end was a glitch or Cashin listening in. Adrian had grown bold, sending her risky texts about their future, but Serafina was beginning to realize that the future Adrian imagined was a fantasy. She looked up at Cashin, searching for a crack in the armor, a sign of the rage she knew should be there. But there was only that terrifying, calm kindness. "You're so good to me, Cashin," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I told you," he replied, leaning down to press a cold kiss to the crown of her head. "I want to give you everything you deserve. By the time the gala arrives, the whole city will see exactly what happens to the things I cherish." He walked away, leaving her shivering in the heat of the room. Serafina realized then that Cashin wasn't ignoring the affair. He was decorating it. He was dressing her betrayal in diamonds and lace, waiting for the perfect moment to strip it all away and show the world the rot underneath. Adrian Vale had always mistaken silence for weakness. To him, Cashin Morello was a relic, a man who had spent so long sitting on a throne that he had forgotten how to hunt. In the weeks following his promotion, Adrian had moved through the Morello headquarters with an increasing, swaggering sense of invincibility. He saw the way Cashin looked at Serafina, the soft smiles, the constant gifts, and he reached a dangerous conclusion: the king had gone soft. He was a man blinded by a woman's beauty, too old and too comfortable to notice the wolf pacing in his own parlor. "He's a ghost, Serafina," Adrian whispered, pinning her against the wall in a secluded hallway of the Moretti estate during a supposed planning session. He felt like a conqueror, bold enough to touch her in her father's house, just rooms away from where the Morello guard stood watch. "He buys you jewelry because he's forgotten how to give you fire. He's keeping me close because he needs my blood, my energy. He's finished." Serafina looked at him, her eyes wide with a frantic mix of desire and dread. "You don't know him, Adrian. This isn't how he acts. The kindness, it's too heavy. It's desperation," Adrian scoffed, his arrogance blinding him to the cameras he assumed were disabled. He had started making moves, skimming small amounts from the high-security transport project and reaching out to the rival Valenti family. He wasn't just planning to steal Cashin's woman, he was planning to steal his city. "We don't need to hide forever. I've made contacts. Once the gala starts and the transition is official, we leave. Not as fugitives, but as the new power. Cashin won't even see the blade until it's between his ribs." He began to take risks that would have been suicidal for any other man. He sent a bottle of wine to Cashin's table at a private club with a note that held a double meaning only he and Serafina understood. He intentionally missed deadlines, testing the limits of Cashin's legendary patience, waiting for an outburst that never came. Cashin watched it all from his office, his fingers steepled as he reviewed the footage of Adrian's secret meetings with the Valentis. He heard the recording of Adrian's boast about the bold man being over the hill. Instead of anger, Cashin felt a cold, professional satisfaction. Adrian was performing exactly as predicted. He was the dog that thought he was the master because he had been given a long leash. "He thinks he's a lion," Cashin murmured to the empty room, watching on the monitor as Adrian kissed Serafina's hand with a flourish of stolen confidence. "He doesn't realize that I've spent my entire life building cages for things that roar." Adrian Vale was no longer a rival. He was a debt that was maturing, and Cashin Morello was a man who never let a payment go past its due date. The atelier was a temple of ivory silk and hushed whispers, reserved exclusively for the Morello-Moretti union. Serafina stood atop a velvet dais, her reflection multiplied by a dozen mirrors into an endless line of ghosts. The dress was a masterpiece of Victorian lace and hidden corsetry, designed to make her look like a saint. But as the seamstresses pinned the train, Serafina felt like she was being sewn into a shroud. Cashin sat in the shadows of the corner, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, watching the process with his terrifying, unnerving focus. He had been unusually quiet all morning, his presence a heavy weight in the room. "You look breathtaking, Serafina," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a cold blade. "A woman of such purity. It's almost a shame to hide anything beneath all that lace." He stood up and walked toward the dais, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. As he approached, he reached into his breast pocket as if searching for a pen. He pulled out a small, folded slip of paper, a receipt, seemingly, and as he reached out to touch the lace of her sleeve, the paper slipped from his fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed face up on the ivory fabric of her skirt. Serafina's breath hitched. It wasn't a receipt. It was a high-resolution still from a security feed. The image was grainy, shot through rain and glass, but unmistakable. It showed her in the alley, her face tilted up toward Adrian Vale, their silhouettes blurred into a single act of betrayal. The blood drained from her face so quickly she felt the room tilt. Her eyes flew to Cashin's. He didn't look angry. He looked expectant. He was offering her a final, narrow door, a chance to fall at his feet, to confess, to beg for the mercy he might still hold for a woman he once intended to love. "Is something wrong, my dear?" Cashin asked, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "You look as though you've seen a ghost. Or perhaps just a memory you thought was buried." Serafina's hands trembled beneath the silk. She looked at the photo, then at the man who held her entire world in his hands. The air in the room felt like it was being sucked out. She had 2 seconds to decide. She could tell the truth and watch Adrian die, or she could double down on the lie and hope the cage was still made of gold. She swallowed hard, her heart hammering against the ribs of the corset. With a forced, brittle laugh, she picked up the paper and handed it back to him. "It's just a scrap of paper, Cashin. Probably one of the florist's notes you've been obsessing over." Cashin took the photo from her. He looked at it for a long moment, then slowly, methodically, he tore it into tiny, white pieces. He let the fragments fall like snow onto the floor. "You're right," he whispered, his smile returning, the wide, terrifying smile of a man who had just received his answer. "Just a scrap of paper. I suppose some things aren't worth saving after all." The test was over. The verdict was signed. The Moretti-Morello engagement gala was a masterclass in atmospheric dread disguised as celebration. The grand ballroom of the Palazzo della Notte was a sea of black ties, flowing silk, and the heavy scent of $1,000 lilies. To the elite of the city, it was the social event of the decade. To the 3 people at the center of the storm, it was a graveyard. Cashin stood on the mezzanine, a king surveying his subjects. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo, his presence casting a long, cool shadow over the festivities. He held a glass of vintage scotch, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, steady sound that mimicked a heartbeat. He watched Serafina move through the crowd, her white dress shimmering like bone under the chandeliers. She was a vision of perfection, but to Cashin's eyes, she was already a ghost. In the corner of the room, near the shadows of the velvet curtains, Adrian Vale leaned against a marble pillar. He checked his watch. An expensive piece he had bought with money skimmed from Cashin's own accounts. He caught Serafina's eye across the room and gave a microscopic nod. The plan was set. At midnight, during the fireworks display, they would slip through the service entrance. A car was waiting. The Valenti family had promised them safe passage out of the state in exchange for the encryption codes to Cashin's shipping manifests, codes Adrian had stolen from the very office Cashin had trusted him to work in. He suspects nothing, Adrian whispered as Serafina drifted past him, pretending to reach for a glass of champagne. He spent the whole night preening. He thinks he's won. Adrian, I'm scared, she breathed, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. He looked at me during the fitting, he knew something. I can feel it. He knows he's losing his grip, that's all, Adrian hissed, his arrogance flared by the adrenaline of the theft. By the time the last firework hits the sky, we'll be ghosts. Let him have his empty ballroom and his silent house. We're taking the fire with us. Cashin watched the exchange from above. He didn't need to hear their words, he had read the frantic tension in Serafina's shoulders and the twitch of Adrian's jaw. He turned to his head of security, who stood like a statue 2 paces behind him. The Valenti's car is in position? Cashin asked, his voice a low, melodic baritone. Yes, sir. And the encryption codes they received are the modified versions you prepared. Cashin took a slow, appreciative sip of his drink. Excellent. Make sure the fireworks are particularly loud tonight. I want the sound to carry across the entire harbor. It's important that everyone remembers exactly where they were when the Morello legacy was redefined. He began to descend the grand staircase, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. He walked directly toward his fiancée and her lover, his smile wide and welcoming. It was the smile of a man who was about to give a gift that no one in the room would ever forget. The stroke of midnight arrived with a theatrical rumble of thunder that matched the first burst of fireworks over the harbor. Inside the ballroom, the lights dimmed to a dramatic, candlelit glow. Cashin Morello stepped onto the central dais, his silhouette cutting a sharp, authoritative figure against the velvet curtains. In one hand, he held a crystal flute of vintage champagne, in the other, a small remote. Friends, family, and partners, Cashin's voice boomed, amplified by the silent, high-end audio system. Tonight was meant to be a celebration of a merger. A union of the Morello and Moretti legacies. But as I watched Serafina these past weeks, I realized that a woman of her spirit deserves a gift more personal than a ring. Serafina stood at the edge of the dance floor, her fingers white as she gripped Adrian's arm. Adrian smirked, his chest puffed out, convinced this was the rambling of a man conceding his prize. I have spent my life protecting what is mine, Cashin continued, his eyes locking onto Serafina's with a terrifying, hollow kindness. But I have learned that true power is knowing when to set something free. To show the world exactly what it is. Please, look at the screens. A massive projection dropped from the ceiling. The room went silent as a video began to play. It wasn't a montage of childhood photos or engagement shoots. It was a crisp, high-definition compilation of the last 3 weeks. The rain-slicked alley. The whispered meetings in the Moretti hallways. The footage of Adrian Vale handing over encrypted files to the Valenti family. Files Cashin had laced with a virus that was, at this very moment, erasing the Valenti's offshore accounts. The ballroom gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a dying fire. Serafina's father, the elder Moretti, turned a sickly shade of gray. The alliance was dead, the Moretti name was now synonymous with treachery. Cashin didn't shout. He didn't signal his guards. He simply raised his glass toward the frozen couple. Adrian, I've left your car running at the service entrance. The encryption codes you stole, the Valentis have realized they are fakes. They are likely waiting for you at the city limits. And Serafina, he said, his voice dropping to a chillingly soft register, you are free. I have had your things moved to Adrian's apartment. It's a small, 3rd-floor walk-up in the district he so loves. I wish you both the passion you so clearly craved. He took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne. The mercy was the most brutal part of the execution. He wasn't killing them, he was stripping them of his protection, his money, and their dignity, then handing them over to a city of enemies he had meticulously provoked. As the fireworks reached a deafening crescendo outside, the lovers realized the true depth of the cage Cashin had built. It wasn't made of gold or silk. It was made of their own choices. Cashin stepped off the dais, walking through the crowd as they parted in absolute, terrified silence. He had lost a fiancée, but he had regained his city. The king was not only on his throne, he was the only one left standing in the room who still knew how to breathe.